Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Ichigo was Soul King and ended up in Overlord and Harem with all? Before I start, please do support for more awesome content, and subscribe my channel and like this video. If you like to hear adult version of this and other stories, I'll give you link of my Patreon. Go support and follow the Ballad-Eternal for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story. Link in the description. Let's start this video. He couldn't feel his hands. That had to be bad. Why couldn't he feel his hands? Opening his eyes, he could only see out of one, and what he saw in front of him made his heart drop. Aizen. Sitting no more than a few meters in front of him. Wrapped up in those seals. Was he too in such seals? No, it couldn't be. It couldn't be, they wouldn't do that to him. Ichigo, try as he might, couldn't find anybody else that would do that to him. No, Central 46 could have ordered it. Just thinking that made him think of all the people that would have rebelled in an instant. They couldn't have done that anyways. The Godai had so few people after the defeat of Yhwach that they couldn't have made another council so soon. Just admitted Kurosaki, they took us both out the moment they found out we defeated Yhwach. Your friends helped them too. Heh. Ichigo couldn't see Aizen's mouth move, then where did that voice come from? Oh please, you're brighter than that, Kurosaki. This is nothing more than a Kido I developed in my time within this cell. Now what will you do now that everyone has sealed you away? No, now that everyone has cast you aside. Ichigo shut his eyes, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Aizen was staring into him, into his soul. Laughing at how he was struggling right now. No, they wouldn't. Aizen smirked internally. It may be the truth, but it was always fun to mess the only being powerful enough to fight him as equals. To get under his skin was something he so missed. They did regardless, and you just have to admit that to yourself so you can move forward. He had had his fun, now it was time to get that fire within him burning. He needed Ichigo to get so much stronger, and there was a single way to do this clear in his mind. It's true, King, as loath as I am to say it, the madman is telling the truth. This seemed to snap Ichigo back to reality for a moment, and he opened his eye to see that Aizen did indeed have his gaze locked onto the substitute Soul Reaper. His iris was glowing a bright purple before a purple mist seemed to move out of his eye and move across the vast darkness of the room over to Ichigo. Watching the mist, he struggled to move away from whatever that mist was and away from whatever scheme Aizen had hatched, but resistance was futile as the mist crawled up his body and then began to infiltrate his body through his own free eye. Then, pain ruptured all across his body and he let out a muffled scream as he lost consciousness and went limp within his restraints. Aizen watched the mist move over to Ichigo while smiling internally. It would be mist, but it was a necessary part of his plan. He didn't need it anymore. The best he could hope for was to give his experiment, no Ichigo, a blade strong enough to shatter fate. Ichigo slowly opened his eyes to see his inner world. Or rather, something that slightly resembled his inner world. It was a maze of shattered buildings with a purple mist that seemed to hang around the remains of the buildings. Standing up, Ichigo moved to the edge of the fragment he stood on, and stared down. Below there was an endless abyss. A quick gaze upwards confirmed his suspicions. Hanging above the shattered remains were heavy storm clouds. Short flashes of light revealed his true inner turmoil. With a signature scowl, he jumped off the edge and moved at breakneck speed from fragment to fragments. What the dash? Ichigo looked onward, shocked, as once he passed the building fragments he found a lush oasis that took the appearance of a floating island. Waterfalls roared of the edges of the island, with a small rainforest covering the majority of the island. A pool in the center held small dots that could only be interpreted as his spirits. Moving as fast as possible, Ichigo sped towards the pool. Crashing into the pool with as much grace as a boar that attempted a cannonball, Ichigo rose back to the top to see Yhwach and Tensa sitting in the pool with a third figure. Come join us, Ichigo, we have much to discuss. Ichigo scowled but complied with Yhwach as they revealed who exactly the newcomer was. The two were having a staring contest, and neither was willing to give an inch to the other. How long had it been since he had been told what happened by his spirits? Hours, days, or maybe years. His concept of time was shot a long time ago. Enough of this game, have they told you or not? Ichigo merely scowled as best he could, but the man was right. After being told what he had, there was no other way. They wouldn't lie to him about a situation so bleak. Yeah. They did. You were right. Ichigo could feel the smirk from where he was sitting. It wasn't something he wanted to admit it, but that schemer was right. I assume you have some kind of plan? He did hate that smirk he knew that man was wearing proud under the seals. In fact, I do. However, it will take both of our strength to accomplish it, so I hope I can have your cooperation. A scowl began to form, but what choice did he have? Aizen was the only other person that could understand his current situation, and if anyone could get them out, it was him. Loath he was to say it, but Aizen is his only chance. I will, but if you try anything behind my back, then you'll pay. Aizen let out a dull chuckle. I would expect nothing less of the only man that I would ever call my equal. Ichigo had at least that going for him. He did beat Aizen once before, and he was much stronger now than he was before. If push came to shove, he could and would kill Aizen. He did have to be careful not to let himself fall victim to one of his schemes, though. Aizen had brains to back his power, and that made him dangerous. There was no way that Ichigo could beat him in a battle of the mind. He would have to correct this shortcoming of his if he ever hoped to survive without going insane. Then tell me, Aizen, what exactly is your plan? I call this captain's meeting to order. Shunsui sat at the head of the formation wearing grim expressions. The solemn faces of his subordinates did not weigh well on his shoulders. However, had he not gone through with the will of the highest authority, then he might very well be in the same situation, and somebody else would have done what the Imperial Guard had asked of him. Shaking his head, Shunsui once more cast his gaze out towards the captains. That was not a fate he wanted any of them to hold over their heads. Better all the resentment be placed on him, and not anyone else. Plus, it would be foolish to just abandon the Godai on a personal attachment. They were short-staffed after the war. Even in the ensuing years that followed the Quincy invasion, the Soul Society was nowhere near finished with the reconstruction efforts. He let out a sigh. Now he had to find some way to raise morale before other Shinigami started to get a revolt in their head. Damn Ichigo, and his effect on Soul Society. Not that he blamed the kid. He was just doing what he thought was right, and he did save the Soul Society on multiple occasions, and he was grateful. However, if he hadn't caused such a radical change in the personality of the Godai, then maybe there wouldn't be as much work for him at the moment. Whatever. At the end of the day, it was bound to happen. He just didn't think it would be to this extent. Listen, there are no prying ears here, so let me be forward with this. We had no other options. Bullshit. Shunsui flinched. He expected it, but nevertheless it hurt all the same. Kenpachi Zaraki, captain of the 11th Division, and the first to speak up about the situation from the start. Him and Byakuya along with Rukia petitioned the Royal Guard to revoke the order to no avail. Their failure almost seemed as a blessing because it was the only thing holding them all together. A common purpose and goal. While on the surface he had to play it cool and pretend he agreed, he did little to push the topic. That was until today. He really needed to think of some way to lighten his workload, and after filing the most recent resignation form, he finally thought of one way to save the kid. After Kenpachi's outburst, the room took that as the moment to express their discontent with the situation at hand, with the only individuals not taking part being Mayuri and Soifun. Both of which have next to no reason to appreciate Ichigo outside of him being instrumental to the defeat of both Aizen and Yawatch. They were the two that were more than happy to oblige when Shunsui had given the order to seal Ichigo and Aizen in their weakened states. While it was nice for someone to have his back, those two were far from the supporters he had wished for. This is about how we might be able to free Ichigo. With those words, Shunsui had gained the undivided attention of all of the other captains. Taking a breath in preparation, he laid out his plan. A plan that might take decades to pull off, but they had time, and so did Ichigo. As long as he got out, it might just be worth it, even if he wouldn't be able to start in this world. Several centuries later, Ichigo's inner world, HUF. Ichigo slammed into and subsequently shattered one of the last of the fragments of his inner world. At this point in time, all that stood now was the floating island where he first met her. Aizen should never have given her up. He guessed there was some plan behind it now, but that wasn't at the forefront of his mind at the moment. He had to be focused on his training. His inner spirits being the best to train with, as when he learned a skill or got stronger, they learned the same skill and too got stronger. You ever think that those buildings are parts of your mind and that by destroying them you're actually destroying your mind? Ichigo just scoffed and attempted the nameless Kurohitsuji once more. A large black box started to form. This time, instead of blowing up in his face like last time, this one only wavered a little bit before stabilizing fully as the shadowy black blades pierced the box and the spell shattered to reveal a badly battered woman with purple hair. She seemed worse for wear, but the smile she wore spoke volumes about how proud she was. I would be inclined to believe that that was the most profound thing you have said in the last decade, Zangetsu. The Zanpakuto spirit scowled at Yawach before crossing his arms and moving to the island where a large cloud of dust began to form. Ichigo, having just witnessed the childishness of his inner spirit, just let out a dull sigh. Would you two stop bickering and just help us with my training? Yawach grinned and Zangetsu was hot on his heels. Ichigo's sweat dropped as he appeared to be surrounded by all three of the spirits. This is not what I meant, guys. His words bore no ground though as he readied his blade, and so began another long training session with his inner spirits. For some reason all of them had this strange fixation with beating the ever-loving crap out of him. Sadists, the whole lot of them. Ichigo slowly opened his one eye. Darting around the chamber, he finally centered on his target. Aizen. The two nodded and Ichigo slowly started to build up his Ryatsu before going Bankai, then moving into his resurrection and finally his newest transformations, Volstandig, and his fully ascended form. Meanwhile, Aizen had just been releasing his Ryatsu at maximum. Even the Seiki walls of Mukun couldn't absorb the massive amount of spiritual pressure from both individuals. Slowly the seals on both of them began to burn away. Both of them simply sat in their respective chairs for a moment after the seals had fully left them. Then their power skyrocketed. No longer being contained by the seals, the two managed to release a power that shook the core of Mukun itself. It was no easy feat to pull off, but the two needed to have access to their full power in order to accomplish what they had been planning for the last several centuries. With a simple nod, the two began a long chat in unison as the air around them took on a purple hue as the room was illuminated by the power of the Hogyoku. Somehow, even with their combined power and continued chanting and even the boost of the Hogyoku, the spell that began to surround the two seemed to fluctuate and phase in and out of existence. They didn't have much choice but to push on as they were both sure that their little stunt didn't go unnoticed. Continuing the chant together, the two spoke the last words and the purple light of the spell and the Hogyoku expanded and blinded both of the ascendant beings as both blacked out. The main door to Mukun was pushed open and Shunsui along with the rest of the captains of the Godai looked into the empty room. Dust still falling from the massive room. So it's done. We've set you up, Ichigo. Good luck. Soifun scoffed, causing Shunsui to turn to her with a puzzled expression. Forgive me, Captain Commander, but did you not intend for Aizen to escape too? Shunsui merely let out a low chuckle in response. Indeed I did not, however, if anyone can get Aizen onto the path of good it would be Ichigo. I'm sure they will work well together. However, that little stunt did drain all of us, so I would hope that all of you get some rest. We'll debrief about this in a week. Be ready. Right. The collective call from all of the captains of the Godai 13 rang throughout the hall as they all headed back up the shaft of Mukun. Some to celebrate a success and others to plan their next move. No matter where Ichigo went, they would still have to plan for the case that the two of them somehow managed to find a way back and what chaos that would bring to this, as well as what chaos the two of them would bring to wherever they went. Steadily opening his eyes, Ichigo snapped them back closed. Why was it so bright? Slowly opening them once more, he took a moment to look around. Wait a minute, this is sunlight. Ichigo began to chuckle almost insanely, taking a moment to just take it all, and he decided that it was time to actually stand up. Finally being able to take in his surroundings, Ichigo was struck by how many people he found laying around the plains that he seemed to be transported to. You have a good nap, Ichigo? He knew that voice. Where had he heard it last? His eyes shot wide open as he spun and, without any effort on his part, caught the incoming strike. The force behind the strike caused a massive burst of pressure to be exerted on the ground as it began to cave in upon itself. Grimjo? The blue-haired Espada grinned from ear to ear before relaxing. Yeah, glad you remembered after all this time, Strawberry. Grimjo went for another strike, but after the nickname, Ichigo wasn't in the mood for that. He was more concerned about the whereabouts of Aizen. He had to be somewhere. After catching another 5 of Grimjo's punches, he had had enough and knocked Grimjo out by focusing his Ryatsu on only the panther. So he found you before I did. He may not amount to much, but his speed is surely impressive. Aizen, Ichigo snapped around and a scowl made its way back onto his face. I guess you could say that, but right now I'm more concerned with where we are and why there are hollows. And are those Quincy? Aizen simply nodded before Ichigo's scowl deepened. This could cause some issues. You think they could be trusted? I do. The Kido was meant to use the Hogyoku as a base and take us to a parallel universe, however it seems it has taken us to something completely different. You feel that? Ichigo nodded as he took the moment to gaze back up to the sky. Heavy amounts of spiritual particles, but no Ryatsu signatures above 4th seat. Even those are few and far between. Aside from those that came with us, of course. It was all so very confusing to Ichigo. How could the Kido go so right yet so wrong at the same time? It made no sense. Whatever, he sighed. At least this is better than being in Mukon. The sunlight felt nice on his skin. Exactly. It would seem we've come to a boorishly weak world. Of course Aizen would comment on that. Ichigo pinched the bridge of his nose. You know you could lay off that god complex of yours. Right now we need to worry about our guests. The smirk he felt was more than the answer he was about to get, but he guessed that he had to get used to this as they are to be working together in the future, already taken care of. I have a list of all their names and they are all living in illusion through my Bankai ATM. The former Sexta Espada was the only one that managed to escape before I could trap him. In his Segunda Etapa, Grimjow's speed could rival his own, so that was a little surprise for Ichigo, but not as much as it would have been. You work fast. Aizen handed Ichigo a list of all those present and how powerful each is. Aside from the soul, that everyone here is more powerful than the strongest signature out there. Wait. Ichigo turned to Aizen for a moment before he felt it too. Both turned in the direction of the Ryatsu they were feeling. That has to be at least captain, if not twice the power of a captain. Who are these individuals? Aizen frowned with his mind calculating the possibilities. They're from another world. Ichigo shrugged. If push came to shove, he or Aizen could take them. If that is so, then I guess we have competition. No other reason to hang around and start any fights. If they get in our way, then we'll just have to make friends. An audible scoff came from Aizen. You have much to learn, Ichigo. However, I'm sure you'll figure it out in due time. Ichigo brushed off the cryptic words and continued to stare out across the vast plains. It really was a sight to behold. Sighing internally, he turned on his heel and headed to where Aizen was presumably constructing their new home base. He had worked out the details with Kyoka, and she relayed the information to Aizen through the link they had developed over their stay in Mukon. As he crested the hill, Ichigo looked down, and was slightly taken aback by the massive fortress that the two godlike beings had dreamt up. It was magnificent to see it in reality. It resembled a large coliseum, although the main structure would be underground. Mukon had gotten them used to being deep underground. It was still something to respect, all made with the ambient spiritual particles that just floated in the atmosphere. Ichigo could even feel himself, along with the other Quincy, slowly absorbing the particles to replenish their reserves. Thinking back to those Ryatsu signatures, several of them had been on par with Kenpachi, if not stronger. A much greater quantity were around captain level in strength. Hitsugaya maybe? All of them were weak. If they threatened the people of this world, then he would step in. Aizen wouldn't. No, he couldn't stop him. Not that he would try if Ichigo were to kill them all anyways. This was all just a bit much for Ichigo. Once Aizen was done, and he could talk to those that came with them, the hollows wouldn't be an issue. They all had seen him defeat Aizen. They wouldn't try to kill him as they are, and even if they hadn't seen his fight with Aizen, then his mere presence would invoke some level of survival instinct within them. However, if the Quincy acted up, then he would be forced to act, and if need be, take out the ones not willing to cooperate with his or Aizen's wishes. If it meant protecting this new world they arrived in, he would go to any length. Entering the Colosseum, Ichigo found the Quincy and Hollows all standing up and now separated into their two groups. Although it seemed that the Quincy were a bit shaky on whether they were one group or multiple. Everyone. We've all been transported to a new world and we have to work together in order to survive. Ichigo called out and projected as much as he could, but his comments sent the Quincy into an uproar of yelling. Basby was the first to rush him. Well, Ichigo thought to himself. It was worth a shot. Releasing his spiritual pressure, everyone in the Grand Colosseum fell to their knees. The soldat were less affected, but they still were forced flush against the ground. Ichigo shook his head. He had spent way too much time around Aizen. I said, we'll have to work together from now on, so if you could just work with me, then we might all survive. Okay. It was a bluff, but he held the power in this situation. They wouldn't move against him like this. After a moment he relented and raised his spiritual pressure back into a range that nobody but maybe Aizen could feel. Now that Ichigo has so splendidly shown all of you, we can crush you like the insects you are. Now, are there any objections to Ichigo and I ruling over you beasts? There was some murmuring among the crowd of spiritual beings, but no one was willing to take the bait. Aizen let a small smirk worm its way onto his face. He did miss this. However, with Ichigo around, it may be a bit of an issue, but that can always be resolved with time. Not that he wanted to manipulate his little experiment, but he had grown so strong it actually might be a challenge to beat him as easily as before. The two had grown quite close in their centuries of confinement, so maybe it won't be so bad after all. If there are no objections, then I think you should all choose your rooms. The second floor is dedicated to housing, so why not pick out some quarters? I hope they are to your liking, and if you find something displeasing or not to your standards, then we will discuss it when we meet on the third floor. In 1 hour we will discuss what the plan of action is. Ichigo waved them away as he and Aizen used Shuinpa to reach the third floor in mere moments. Following Aizen into a side room, the two sat across from each other, as Ichigo poured some tea for them. Taking a sip, Aizen smiled lightly. That was quite the show out there, I even felt that. How much of your pressure did you force upon them? Ichigo set his cup down for a moment before shaking his head. That would be telling. What is your first step? I'm sure you have the next few years already planned out to perfection. Aizen chuckled lightly. Indeed, I already have a reason for the Hollows and Quincy to rally together. The small collection of souls to the north is a good place to start if you would like to go check it out. Ichigo nodded politely. I see, I'd enjoy doing that. I'd like to know more about the Quincy before making a move. Yawatch could only help me so much. I'm sure you are already aware of the extent of their abilities? Aizen pulled a sheet of paper out from under the table. From what I saw in my illusions, their powers from the original Yawatch have merged with their soul at his death. They do appear weaker as they cannot enter Volstandig as you can anymore. However, I'm sure that they are all useful to an extent. Ichigo listened while he skimmed the paper. Prepared as always, I'll take a skin in Grimmjow. I did notice some low-level soldiers with them. Were those the soldat that attacked during the first invasion? Aizen slid another sheet of paper in response, as he took another sip of the still steaming tea. Indeed. They are about 4th seat in strength. There are about 1,000 of them in total, but if we find a way to get into that pocket dimension that Yawatch created, I'm sure that we can get more in time. However, that is not a question I can answer. Ichigo nodded. It would be best to leave with a small number of people. If this is a new world, then their attire will seem weird and clearly point out that they are not from here. Before I leave, can you send some soldat out to gather some information? I'd like to know how best to fit into this world. Wouldn't want to make ourselves too obvious so soon. He couldn't let those other people find out about their little hideout right from the bat. It would cause too much trouble and lead to too much risk. It just wasn't worth it. If you wish to do it, then why not do it yourself? You've shown to them your power, but they may not understand fully until you command them personally. Ichigo waved of Aizen's comment. You are much better at this leading thing than I will ever be. I know you've been teaching me, but I still don't think that it will be necessary right now. Aizen finished his tea. I don't think you give yourself much credit. I'm sure if things had gone differently that the Soul Society would have made you a captain very quickly. However, I guess there is no persuading you. I will need a favor from you if I am to do this. Ichigo immediately snapped up to look at the genius across from him. Fine, I'll go order the soldat. You win this time. Letting out his breath, Ichigo slowly stood up. The air of achievement around Aizen was palpable at this point. Not like you'd actually tell them anyway. With a wave as he walked away, Ichigo went out in search of some soldat to entrust the responsibility of finding out the fashion sense of this new world. Not like it really mattered, he just didn't want to draw that much attention to his little fortress so soon. Leelbaro and Askinak Lavar walked the halls of the second floor together. Both being former members of the Sternritter and Schutzstaffel, they felt the power of Yawatch within Ichigo when he forced them to their knees. Only someone on Yawatch's level could do such a thing to them either way. Both he and Aizen were on the special war powers list for a reason after all. What do you think about this whole situation, Leo? Askin was laid back as ever during this whole thing. He didn't care who was in charge really. As long as they didn't plan on starting any wars and he wouldn't have to do anything, he was perfectly fine with whatever they wanted, and with someone like Ichigo in charge that wouldn't be an issue. However, now that he had the power of Yawatch in him, then by proxy that means he was their king, so he wasn't bothered in the slightest that he was putting himself in charge. Leal, on the other hand, showed a little more discontent with the whole situation. If our god has fallen and that child holds his soul, then sooner or later our lord will return to the child. I'll serve him, although it would seem that our powers are no more. Did that freak hold you in his illusions as well? Askin hummed in affirmation. Yeah, made me fight all kinds of monsters. Killed them all easily. Unfortunately, I still hold the death dealing, however I no longer have access to my Volstandig. Holding a frown on his features, Askin pondered why that was. The same goes for me. I have ascended higher than before with the power now being wholly my own now. As for our perfected forms, I wouldn't pay it any mind. Our Lord will return those when he sees us worthy of such a privilege. We will probably be first. What is your opinion on the hollows that are also under our Lord's command? The lanky former Sternritter pulled a hand out of his pocket to scratch the scruff that had begun to form under his chin. I honestly don't care. As long as Kurosaki wants them alive, I couldn't care any less. The former leader of the Schultz staff nodded. I see, if they decide to move against us, then we will wipe their disease from this fortress. Askin waved off the remark. Whatever you say, boss. Just leave me out of it. I'm going to take this time to relax before things start heating up. Although you may want to talk to the buzzard and those demons. They may not take such a liking to our current situation as we have. Very well, I'll make sure to stop by their rooms to make sure to keep the peace here. You are dismissed, Sternritter D. Bye. As they parted ways, a shadow slunk back around a corner while the two Sternritter smirked. The spy took the bait, hook, line and sinker. Now all that was left to do was drum up a little chaos. Private Bridget and Private Second Class Stefan approached the gates of Erantal. Their appearance drew a few undesired looks from the other incoming travelers, but neither of the Quincy paid them any heed. Stefan let out a dull sigh. How long have we been waiting in line again? Bridget pushed up her thin spectacles as the light gleamed off of them. About 10 minutes, Stefan. Next time you ask, I'll give you a sound beating in the name of our Lord. Stefan flinched under the shiny black brim of his cover. It contrasted against the blinding white of the rest of the cover along with the rest of the uniform. He reached a hand inside his double-breasted trench coat and pulled out a small pocket watch. Reading the time, he let out another drawn-out sigh. I see. Waving off the anger of the shorter female, he held his hands behind his back. At least it was good to be out. It had been a couple days since their arrival in this new world, and only now are they able to send people to the nearby settlements in order to probe the cultures of this world. From what he had been briefed on, one of the new Sternritter were being sent out to a small village northwest of this city. Bridge? She turned slightly to better hear him as she kept her eyes on the line as they shifted forward steadily. You ever stop and think about why we're here? Her nose twitched in annoyance at her confusion. What was he on about? What do you mean? He moved to put his hands in his coat pockets, however he decided against the action. I mean working alongside the hollows. What could Lord Ichigo see in them? Even that aside, what are we going to do moving forward? Tilting his head up, he took in the partly cloudy sky as his coat shifted with the wind. I'm not sure, but no matter what, as long as it allows us to do this instead of dying at the hands of those filthy Shinigami, then I guess I don't really care. Stefan let a small smile appear on his face as he turned his gaze to the back of her brunette head. I guess you're right. She turned and beamed a smile in return. You worry too much, Stefan. He reached a hand up and scratched the back of his head with a nervous chuckle. I guess you're right. Now we have a mission to accomplish. She nodded in return, and they went back to waiting in line. Only a few more people left to go, and they would be in their first city since arriving in this new world. Aizen must have been laughing at this point. Ichigo sighed as he buried his face in a pile of paperwork. This really was a bore for him, however someone had to take care of the administrative work. After reconstructing the Sternritter and making them generals of his soldat army and designating the Espada into other aspects of work, he was left with Aizen to formalize everything, and since computers were a luxury of his old world, he had to do everything by hand through paper formed from spiritual particles. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. Come in. Ichigo heard the soldat stationed at the door slowly open it and step inside. My lord, Sir Granz is here to see you. Interesting. Ichigo nodded and the pink-haired Espada stepped inside. Seo was their head of research and development, and he was good. He would have preferred Urahara, but Seo would have to do for now. Seo bowed before standing at his full height. He stood a few inches taller than Ichigo, so sitting down he appeared quite tall. What do you have to report, Seo? The gleam in his eyes made Ichigo lean forward in anticipation. Well, I have completed that project you assigned me, and I have already sent out the drones. Of course, all of them have stealth capabilities. Leaning back in his chair, the strawberry smiled. This was good. Recon was important. As much as he wanted to just go out head first like how he sent those soldat, he didn't want to ruin things so soon by being as reckless as he was in his youth. That's good. Anything else to report, or did you just come here to flaunt your success? Seo let out a low chuckle before a wide Cheshire grin crawled across his face. Oh, of course not, my lord. I took initiative and, well, it might be best if you just read for yourself. He slid a file over to Ichigo, as the Carrot Top picked up the manila folder and skimmed over the file. Very good sale. Make sure to get the appropriate samples, and I want a report of the costs for such a move in case it has to be used. Keep updating your efforts, and for the love of Kami, please finish your project on computers. Oh, but of course, milord. Ichigo waved a hand and sent Sail away. Cloning chambers, huh? Grimjow, if you don't stop pacing, I'm going to hurt you. As the panther continued to pace the main chamber they had chosen to base their rooms around, Grimjow easily blocked the incoming strike from Lilith. Hey! Don't you ignore me! She continued to pummel the blue-haired hollow to no avail. She then ran to Stark, who was face down in some cushions that he had pulled out. They forced him to be here, but they couldn't force him to pay any attention. It was bothersome when she kept stomping on his back. Shifting onto his side, Lilith fell off of his back with an oof. You really shouldn't be attacking him. He's just minding his own business. However, Grimjow, you can't keep sulking like this. Grimjow spun on Nelio before snapping at her. You expect me to be calm when the strawberry has changed so much? Don't pretend you haven't seen him being all buddy-buddy with Ing Eisen. Nell simply shook her head in response. He has changed, but I don't think it's for the worse either way. He beat Eisen once before, he can do it again. He wouldn't let any harm come to us just because he's working with a lunatic. Harabel nodded sagely. If he's anything like you've told me, then there should be nothing to worry about. How about stepping outside and letting off some steam, unless you want to try and take on one of those Quincy? You see how they look at us. Their opinions certainly haven't changed. Crossing his arms with a drawn-out sigh. You got that right. We could all die, and I think they'd be happier for it. However, Ichigo clearly values us if he put us in charge, and since Eisen didn't object to that decision, then maybe Ichigo really does have the lunatic on a leash. Harabel nodded sagely while Nell just picked up a struggling Lilith with a bright smile. The mood had lightened between the former Espada. All of them had been put in positions of power much higher than the Quincy. Ichigo had gifted them all new scripts, but the Quincy were still weaker than any of their Segunda Etapa. I'm just glad Ichi has enough faith in us to make us commanders over the Quincy. I have two weirdos. Who do you have, Grimjow? The panther in question ran his hand through his hair before shoving his hands in his pockets. All of them were allowed modified versions of their uniforms, so Grimjow took that to the fullest and recreated his old uniform. I used both of them for target practice, and they made me release my Segunda Etapa, so they're strong at least. Granted, the only reason they did was because of the power boost they got from the strawberry. Both of them turned to Harabel, and she just nodded her agreement to both statements. Lilith sat on Stark's back as she pouted in the corner before Grimjow decided to head out of the room. Later, nonchalantly sending a wave over his shoulder while Nell called out an energetic goodbye. You really should just let me sleep, you know? Everyone peered over at Stark as he finally spoke since arriving. Lilith slowly grew red in the face before kicking the wolf with all her might as steam erupted from her ears. After listening to the dull thud, Grimjow considered his options. He couldn't just kill someone to let off his steam, as that might get Ichigo on his ass. Maybe a walk outside wouldn't be so bad after all. Moving through the halls with his hands thoroughly stuffed in his pockets, Grimjow made his way to the exit of the structure they had called their base of operations. Once exiting, he took in a deep breath. The air was dense with spiritual particles. It would seem that next to nobody used them, so they were all for the Nactrike's taking and for their utilization. Now, isn't this a surprise, Commander? Giving a low grunt, he allowed the two Quincy to move behind him before twisting around and grabbing the hand that was aimed to shatter his spine. After which a small explosion of both their pressure cracked the ground. What kind of bitch punch was that, punk? Baz grit his teeth before spitting at Grimjow's feet. Bambietta moved to her commander's right while Baz took the left. So what are you doing out here, kiddie? Brushing off the attack on his pride, Nelio really was beginning to rub off on his personality. Don't worry about it. Shouldn't both of you be training your new Volstandig now anyways? Bambietta sighed exaggeratedly. But that's no fun. Her smile betrayed her true intentions, not that he needed to see it to notice it. The inflection in her voice was enough of an indicator, however he ignored it in favor of sending out his pesquisa. There had to be something interesting going on at this point in time. 1, 2, 3, there were a lot of signatures that almost equaled his power. They barely moved since the last time he checked though, and it's not like he could just go there by himself. Even with his whole forces he'd still get stomped with the combined power of the whole group. Still, he could get close and at least grab some information and maybe take a hostage or two. Grimjow took some time to consider his options before finally deciding on a course of action. Stepping away from their stronghold, he motioned for them to follow. "There's a village a fair bit north. I hope you wimps can keep up." Not missing a beat, he vanished in a sonic boom. "Should we really follow him?" Bambietta dusted off her uniform before turning to Baz. "Not like we have much of a choice. He did beat us within an inch of our lives. I doubt he'd have much trouble doing so again if he wanted to. Best stay on his good side and just deal with it till we can kill him." Nodding in agreement, Bambietta vanished in Harenkyaku. Best chose to pause a moment to consider his own words before speeding off as well. It wouldn't be a good idea to suggest following and be the last one to catch up. "What do you mean we're under arrest?" When Bridget and Stefan had attempted to enter the city limits, they had been stopped, and after identifying themselves and their nation of origin, they had been brought into a side room for questioning. There was somebody calling themselves a mage trying to get them to admit to threatening the town. "Listen, for the 1000th time, we're here merely to purchase some clothes and sightsee. We're not here to invade or bring harm to the people." The guards were still on edge, and the mage wasn't letting up. "Then what's with the military uniform? Do you just enter cities without informing of your arrival? Are you an envoy? I could understand if you were a merchant, but you lack any currency. How were you planning on paying for anything here, or were you just going to steal everything and just walk out like nothing happened?" Bridget pinched her brow. "I'm about done with your bullshit right now. If you really want us to leave, then we'll leave." Standing up, she moved for the door, but the guards had other ideas. Moving in, they aimed their spears towards the Quincy. Seeing her smirk, Stefan tried to calm the situation down. "Now, Bridget, there is no need to get violent." It took a moment, but all the ends of the spears were on the ground and Bridget held her spirit weapon in hand. It took the appearance of a Lu Yi Dao, and she held it across her chest as if to strike again. Spying the mage about to cast a spell, he used Harenkyaku to pin him against the wall. Stefan's face now carried a sense of purpose. He was a soldat after all. He had to be able to be serious when the time called for it. These weaklings couldn't hold a candle to the Shinigami that they had fought in both invasions. Even the 10th seats were stronger than these people. The guards, still in shock, barely noticed the two vanish before their eyes. After moving far from sight of the city, both let out defeated sighs. At least they had some level of information to bring back. The city itself was weak, as well as they did get a grasp of the local wardrobe. That would be useful information. "That was fun, but I don't think we can get away with something like that again. We almost failed our mission." Bridget could do little more than nod in agreement. After they were done catching their breath, they decided to just head back to the Naktrike and report to their chain of command. Askin enjoyed walking the halls of the Naktrike. It was calming in a sense, and if nothing else, then it gave him time to think upon the plan Leal had proposed. What was the best way to inflict chaos without spending too much effort in accomplishing it? Ichigo held their respect, so it would only be natural to either disrupt that or make sure the kid never got involved. In that case, then it would make sense to wait till he was off running some errand. As for the disruption itself, it would make sense to utilize the unease between them and the Hollows. However, doing that would give Aizen more reason to be suspicious of the Quincy's movements. No, it would be stupid to use them so brazenly. But what if he kept it isolated to a select few individuals? Keep it contained so that the few take the fall for the success of the majority? That might just work. While he was musing to himself, Askin had found himself on the 3rd sublevel. This piqued his interest, as he had never been down here as of yet. According to the brief he had received as part of the elite guard, this was security and training. Moving through the halls and peeking into a few doors, he found that many of the soldat were training. As he was part of the elite guard, he had no reason to check on the soldat, but it was nice to know that they continued their training as if another war with the Shinigami was on the horizon. It would seem that Ichigo had motivated them more so than Yawatch had. Not bad for a kid. It was a stray thought, but he had seen the loyalty that he inspired from the Hollows, and if that could also be transferred to the soldat, then that had to be worth something. Maybe this won't be so bad after all. Finally, he reached a larger training ground where he found, unsurprisingly, Quilj Opie overseeing the training of his new unit. He was put in charge of the Quick Reaction Force, or QRF as Ichigo enjoyed calling it. He had assigned the best members of the soldat, as well as the most promising, under the jail's command. It was a sight to marvel at, those poor souls. He was putting them through hell and dragging them out only to subject them to worse and worse. It wouldn't surprise Askin if Quilj had them training, since he was assigned to be the unit's commander. The future of the Naktrike will be interesting to say the least. If the reports are true, this world isn't that advanced or strong. Yes, interesting is the word for the future. Glad I managed to get in on this. It'll be fun to watch. Turning around, Eskin ventured back the way he had come. There was nothing left to see here that he wanted to explore. Perhaps he would pester Leo for a while. With a grin, he slowly moved up the stairs that led to the upper levels. I assume you have sensed their return. Ichigo lowered his head in response. The soul that he had sent to the nearby settlement wasn't due to return for another day or two. This might be an issue. Yes, I have. Something went wrong. The fear I feel in their Ryatsu is more than an indicator. Aizen let out a low chuckle. Ichigo couldn't even help the smile as he felt Lil Tato's Ryatsu spike. They're not dead, so there is some hope for those two. Pushing up his glasses, Aizen took consideration of his fellow lord's words. You think they show promise? Ichigo nodded without hesitation. Yes. I think that they're going to be quite valuable to us in the future. They're powerful and have more than enough room to grow. I suggest moving them out of the support unit and into the offensive unit, however their skills may not develop as I have foreseen if we do that. Ichigo closed his eyes as a headache overcame him. Are you alright? Ichigo waved off the false concern. Your impression is making things worse. If you must know though, it's the Almighty. Still haven't fully gotten it under control and occasionally it'll just activate on its own. Aizen attempted to mask his inquisitive nature behind those fake glasses. For some reason the megalomaniac managed to procure a pair and Ichigo felt it was more to mock him than anything else. He knew it was all an act, but he didn't want to waste the energy to address it. The Almighty? So you did inherit that ability from Yawach when you absorbed him. Ichigo could only nod rather than humor Aizen with a response. Yes, and before you addressed the other issue at hand I did feel them head towards that smaller village. I've been tracking them from the start. Another reason why the Almighty had been acting up. He had wanted to use it more often, but his mind was still getting accustomed to the foresight, and it only gave him blurry glimpses of the future regardless, so it wasn't the most reliable ability till he had trained it up. I had figured that you were on top of that situation, you had predicted it would happen after all. Ichigo's face twitched in a momentary feeling of anger before he relaxed. The smirk of success was more than enough proof that Aizen had been messing with him just to get a rise out of the carrot top. Flattery will get you nowhere soon, Aizen. Now why are you really here? Ichigo was genuinely curious at this point, since Aizen wouldn't have come to him without at least 4 reasons, and only one of them was to mess with him by asking about obvious situations already taking place. Maybe another was to see if Ichigo was as competent as he had been trained to be. A test perhaps set up between him and Kyoka. Either way, there was more to him being here than just that. Indeed, there is an actual reason for my being here. He pushed up his glasses again as the false light from the ceiling reflected off of the lenses. Project Genesis is almost complete. Finally, something that would bring a smile to his face. Is that so? Then I guess it's time. Inform Sale if you would. Make sure he is well aware of the consequences of failure on his part. Aizen nodded before vanishing in a modified Shunpa. Finally in peace for a moment, Ichigo leaned back in his chair before closing his eyes and opening them again. In the second it took him to blink, his eyes shifted. Now they had 3 pupils each at intervals. It was time to take a peek at the fruits of their labor. Ichigo watched the river of time pass before him before he locked onto the most likely flow of time and zoomed in on the immediate future. Rather than getting what he wanted, he still saw the clearest vision he had since he started using the ability. He stood in a field by a village, possibly the one Grimjow had ventured off to. On one side of the field were 2 individuals. One, a female in full, pitch-black plate armor, and a much larger being who had covered their face as some kind of red and green mask. The masked figure carried themselves with pride as each movement they made was without wasted movement. He also wore a fully covering cloak that billowed in the wind. Ichigo could tell that both of these people were a part of that group that had suddenly appeared in this world as he had. They boasted massive Ryatsu reserved on par with Kenpachi, with the masked one being of possibly royal guard quality. Dangerous individuals indeed. The other side of the field held nothing but weaklings. The unmasked individual that stood front and center of the group held the most power, but he was only worthy of a lower-ranking Shinigami, maybe 12th seat with room to grow. He appeared rather young, so in maybe a decade he could reach around 10th seat. Given the power of the group of 2, the likelihood of the blonde human surviving that long was in question. Ichigo didn't know how far into the future this event was going to happen, but if the clearness of the situation was an indicator, then it was going to happen soon. It was evening in the vision, so the worst-case scenario was that this was going to happen that same day. Ichigo didn't have a sense of time during the activation of the Almighty, but last he recalled it was around noon. He would only have a few hours at the most. Closing his eyes, Ichigo returned to the present. He didn't need to stay to find the outcome of the battle to reveal Grimmjow's involvement. He already had a vague idea as to what the panther would do, and that battle was settled before it even began. Humans can be idiots at times. He hadn't forsaken his humanity yet, but that didn't mean he wasn't above calling his own species out from time to time. Maybe Aizen had rubbed off on him too much. Rising from his chair, Ichigo vanished in a mix of Shuinpa, Sonido, and Harenkyaku. This boosted his speed threefold. Grimmjow in his segunda etapa couldn't hope to compete. In fact, Aizen was probably the only one that could outdo this speed, but that was only in his advanced form, and even then Ichigo could always use Bankai to negate any advantage in speed Aizen may have had at that point. Speeding through the halls, Ichigo contemplated what his next move should be. It would probably be for the best to leave his Ryatsu hidden and sneak up. If Grimmjow and his subordinates are put in harm's way, then he'll intervene. Other than that, he would simply observe and see how the situation plays out. Grimmjow landed at the treeline surrounding Karn village. Not a moment later, and he was flanked by Bambietta and Bazby. Che, these are all weaklings. There are only 2 people of note in this village. Both of his companions frowned in response. They lacked the ability to sense the Ryatsu of those around them, having given up that ability to instead refine and hone their combat abilities. After a moment of thought, Grimmjow figured it might be better to train that skill in them before they go and get themselves killed. It would be a shame to come home one day and explain to Ichigo why he had just lost his direct subordinates in a fight they couldn't win, while also revealing that he did nothing to correct their shortcomings. He wouldn't hear the end of it. What are we planning to do then, Commander? It would appear that they've gotten a bit serious. Grimmjow nodded to a field where a battle was being waged. We're gonna watch them. Take notes, as any information might be useful to Ichigo and Aizen. Keep your power suppressed, and no matter what, don't intervene. They are insects unworthy of the notice of the Naktrike. Both gave a curt salute before following Grimmjow along the treeline to get a better view of the battle. It would appear that several constructs of magical nature were battling against what appeared to be guard of some kind. Opposing factions? Grimmjow decided to take note of the sigils on both of the groups. Watching the beatdown that was taking place was getting Grimmjow pumped for a fight. If he held himself back, then he might even get a good fight. He would have to go hand to hand and negate his Hiero and avoid using any Siro or Bala. That might just work out, but then again Ichigo would have his head if he just went out, because what if those people had something up their sleeves? It would be best just to lay low and continue watching from a distance. It upset him how much sense Ichigo could make when he put his dense brain to good use. After a few minutes of watching, there was only one left standing on the defending side of the battle. Some warrior. If he had remembered Ichigo's scaling chart, then the warrior might be around 10th seat, or maybe a bit higher. Not bad for a human. Not great, but worthy of attention with him being a human. He didn't really pay attention to what they were talking about, but after the human took many attacks from the construct's head on, he still got back up, and he could admire that about the man. Maybe he should learn the man's name. He might be a good pet to keep around. Grimmjow was about to step in when he heard the command to kill the warrior, but before he could, the man was phased out before 2 figures replaced him. This was bad. These 2 are part of the group all the commanders had been warned against fighting. He opened his pesquisa and frowned. The female in plate armor was around his strength when he used his resurrection, but there was no guarantee that she didn't have an alternate form. Either of them could be human with that kind of power. The cloaked figure was at least on par with his resurrection. It was no wonder they had been advised against engaging with these individuals. With that kind of power, they could challenge the Naktrike and might even come out on top if they played their cards right. Easing his mind, he continued to lay low as the 2 groups conversed with each other. Clearly the 2 were more powerful, so why did the blonde human continue to insinuate that he was stronger? It was a waste of time. Maybe in the past he would have done the same, but that was behind him now. After Aizen and Ichigo along with the other, he had reached the peak of his powers, and there were still those that could crush him with only their spiritual pressure, so it was a waste of time to just run in head first like he had once done. Even these people were on par with him. Really put things into perspective after you get your face punched in by multiple people. Things started to heat up when the blonde human sent 2 of the constructs that stabbed the cloaked figure. Grimmjow thought he introduced himself as Ain's old gown. Of course that didn't work, as Ains crushed the constructs with ease, as expected of someone of that power. However, the blonde wasn't done, as he sent the rest of the constructs at Ains in a vain attempt to finish off the mage. He guessed that was how this world referred to people that could harness Ryatsu. That didn't work, as, after sending away his accomplice, Ains destroyed all of the constructs with one attack. Nothing Asiro couldn't do, but still all of these attacks were new to Grimmjow, and he took note of the names of the spells used. He would have to give a detailed report when Ichigo inevitably found out about his absence. The human seemed to be worried now and sent out the larger construct that was floating behind him, however that too was taken out with just one hit. Then the human brought out a crystal, this was of note to Grimmjow, and summoned something that rivaled lieutenant power. Still nothing to worry about, but a human being able to just summon one of those, even with the help of that relic, seemed a bit much. However, the power gap between Ains and the construct was still vast, and Grimmjow doubted that he would have any trouble dealing with it. Looking behind him, he saw the look on the Sternritter. They were weaker than him and had been previously beaten by beings with the power of the construct, so it was no surprise when he saw them hold a bit of anger and fear in their eyes. "We can't help. I know you hate those airs, but we can't run in like a bunch of idiots. Sit down, shut up, and keep watching." He only got nods with the gritting of teeth from them, but Grimmjow accepted that as the best he would get at the moment, and faced forward just in time to see the construct unleash a power attack on Ains that would have given him some trouble in his base form at one time. Now it was just a fancy light show. As per his previous line of thinking, Ains destroyed the construct with a single spell. These beings were dangerous, and he would have to move with caution in the future. Not long after Ains removed his mask, and Grimmjow had to hold himself back as a skeleton revealed itself underneath. A hollow, perhaps. Not likely, as this new world lacked the ability to fully utilize the Ryatsu that permeated the air, but the resemblance to Barragan twisted a knife in Grimmjow's stomach. Right when he was about to move in again, he felt a presence behind him, and in self-defense he started charging up a zero before Ichigo crushed it in his fist. "You idiot!" Before Grimmjow could ask about when he meant, he felt something was off once more and turned to see that all the mages were gone and both Ains and the knight in plate armor were looking in their direction. "Well, shit." Berenice Gabrielli, formerly Sternritter Q, the question, was sitting in the lounge that was shared among herself and her fellow unit commanders. Since she was in charge of her own unit, the Inquisitors, she only had to report to Kurosaki. However, that did not ease her mind at all. She had been brought back to life along with many of her comrades from under Yawach, but instead of Yawach they had to follow Kurosaki and Aizen. The orange-haired kid may have killed Yawach, but she wanted to know how. He was on the special war potentials, and because of his ability to grow and adapt. Did he adapt to the Almighty? However he did it, she could feel the power of the Almighty when he unleashed his spiritual pressure on them, and it sent shivers down her spine. "So you're here too?" Berenice left her musings to discover the source of the rhetorical question. Quill Jolpi had entered the room and taken a seat across from her. Nodding in acknowledgement, moved to resume her train of thought before she was interrupted yet again. "What happened to you?" She didn't have to read too far into the question to understand what the jail was getting at. Leaning back, she propped up her feet on a coffee table that sat in the center of the lounge. "Well, you could say that I was visiting a friend and his murderer. We didn't get along too well." Quilge attempted, and failed, to hold back a chuckle. "So that's how it was. To be fair, I didn't fare any better." This piqued her interest. "Oh?" Quilge simply nodded in response to her inquiry. "Indeed, I held Kurosaki in Hueco Mundo for a considerable amount of time, but then he broke out. If what I saw is to be believed, he must have Quincy blood in him. He used blood venet against my jail, and he fled. However, I almost had him again before somebody killed me from behind. Not the most elegant death. Better than yours, it would seem." She could only giggle inside as she maintained her aloof exterior appearance. "Che, you should have made a counter for that. Instead of just sealing him, you should have just killed him on the spot. He was strong then, but I doubt it would have taken too much out of you." Quilge mulled over her words for a moment before accepting the comment as a compliment. "That may have worked. It would seem, if the heat is to be believed, then Yawach betrayed us either way, so maybe it was for the best that I gave him my strength earlier than have to come to terms with the Oswalin." She could only nod. She had been so isolated with the training of her soldat that she hadn't heard news of this till now. If that's the case, then maybe it was good that Kurosaki had killed Yawach. Shaking those thoughts from her mind, she set her sights forward. "Do you think Kurosaki will be any different?" The former jail brought a hand to his chin in thought before sighing. "I can't know for sure, We have been given our scripts back and our Volstandig, but he is with Eisen of all people, so if that is any indicator then he may be no different, and for all intents and purposes he might just be a puppet at the tip of Eisen's fingers. For now the best course of action is to just move forward with caution, and see how events play out. However, I have sent spies around to keep tabs on the Hollows as well as the other Quincy here, so maybe we'll be able to glean more information as time goes on from them. Berenice nodded in acceptance of his words. I'll allow you access to my inquisitors as long as you help me. Then it's agreed. This conversation never happened. Berenice couldn't help the smile that crawled across her features after Quilge had vanished in Herenkyaku. This was going to be so much fun. Kneeling before Eisen was a figure surrounded in black. The figure's small frame was accented as they kneeled low before the madman, his soft smile deceiving any who might look upon it. What have you to report, Stinger? The figure seemed to shiver in response, voice quivering in barely restrained anger. It would appear that the Quincy Command is unhappy with your presence. Lord Ichigo is a common ally of the Hollows and Quincy. He has accepted. You, however, are not, sir. Eisen sat down after the report and leaned back in his chair, propping his leg up as he continued to look down on the individual kneeling before him. Thank you for the report, Stinger. If I need you, I will call. Now return to your chamber. With a low bow, the figure vanished in Shuinpa. The Cheshire grin that had sprouted across his face was now the dominant feature. I'll have to thank Sale. He has outdone himself. Slowly removing his mask, Ains glared at the cowering humans before him. They had not heeded his warnings. They had not accepted their fate, and when they knew they had lost they tried to grovel and beg for mercy. All after insulting his name, his protection of the town of Karn village, and underestimating him. What was that you said to Gazef? Cease your futile resistance, and just lay down like a good dog. As an act of mercy, I'll make sure your death is painless. It took all of a few seconds to kill the mages and send Nigan back to Nazarick. Before the pair could head on their way, a small explosion caught their attention off by the treeline. Albedo moved into a defensive stance, and Ains simply observed the four figures that stood in observation. Their features were striking, a large variety of hair colors with red, orange, blue, and black. He held his arm out, and Albedo calmed down as the orange-haired one approached Ains. Ains attempted to read his MP, but what he saw told him that this was unlike those small fry he had just beaten. This man was a being of nigh equal MP to his own. Now that was not the determining factor in PvP, however he had to keep that fact in mind before he started a fight. Good evening, my name is Kurosaki Ichigo. Pleasure to make your acquaintance. When Kurosaki had finally reached the two, he introduced himself, and Ains was convinced that he was from another world. That name was too Japanese to just be a coincidence. No wonder he was this powerful. However, he wasn't from his guild. Maybe another person that got stuck after the cancellation of Yggdrasil. Well met, Kurosaki. I am Ains Olgown, but please call me Ains. Carefully watching the Orangette's gaze, Ains took great care to not let any detail leave unseen. The young man looked around his own age. Maybe friendship can be made. He did appear to have strong allies. You must forgive my subordinate, he gets a bit reckless and managed to leave our base without proper supervision. Ains nodded in understanding. You are forgiven, however I do wish to know something. Are you from Japan? Ains couldn't help the smile form internally at the reaction Ichigo gave. Albedo was giving him an odd look. He would have to deal with that at a later point in time. For now he needed to discern whether this man was a friend or an enemy. He was not one of his old comrades, so his previous hesitation and desire to bring him back to the guild had vanished. He did not have the years of trust with this Ichigo as he did with his old comrades. After composing himself, Ichigo responded to the question. Indeed, I am from Japan. I do not recall there being any undead in Japan that act like you, though. Albedo was about to interrupt, but Ains raised a hand and silenced her. But you are familiar with undead, are you not? Or were your words misleading? Ichigo took a moment to think about the further questions. There are undead, but I have only seen one that held a fully boned body, and he is now dead. This Ichigo sounds like he or someone he knew had killed this other Elderlick. Although he did not refer to the game, so maybe this is someone from another world that is unlike his own. That thought required further explanation. If that was the case, then Ichigo is a complete unknown to Ains, and just the thought of that sent chills of fear down his exposed spine. That is intriguing. Before I part ways with you, I would give you a warning. This town is protected by the name of Ains Olgown. Do not attack it or I will kill you. He put his aura into it, and Ains could swear that albedo was shaking to an extent, however it didn't seem to have an effect on Ichigo. It would appear the orange jet was stronger mentally than originally guessed. He would have to plan out his next move with caution in mind. Very well, I'll keep your words in mind. After giving a low bow, Ichigo turned about and vanished with his underlings at a speed Ains could barely follow. The only thing that Ains could put into words after seeing their speed without the aid of spells was fast. You idiots! Ichigo smacked Grimmjow upside the head once more. The panther frowned as Ichigo admonished him for his actions. Do you have any idea what could have happened to you if you had attacked him? You would have died. Pinching the bridge of his nose, the orange jet let out a deep sigh. Yeah? I know, could have died, yada yada. Get over yourself, Ichigo. I'm not the weakling you beat with just your Bankai. I've gotten my segunda etapa and you're even more powerful. I could have taken him had you let me. That's not the point. That lich had more than double the Ryatsu of a captain. He was at the level of Yamamoto. You couldn't take him even if you had your segunda etapa. The only people able to actually compete against his raw strength are myself, Aizen and the guard, and even then that's not taking into consideration the tactics and experience that he may possess that might give him the edge even against the guard. It would be best if we avoid hostilities against him. You would be able to take the warrior that accompanied him though. Grimmjow still wasn't convinced. Ichigo closed his eyes before continuing. There would be no argument that he could come up with that would not leave room for Grimmjow to argue with him. Now I expect a full report within the day. I want one from each of you as all three of you observed Mr. Ains' display of power over the humans before I arrived. You're dismissed. Waving them off, Ichigo made note of the gazes of disdain from Baz and Bambi, however it did not bother him too much. They would learn, and if it took them getting beat up a little bit then he didn't pay it too much mind. Ichigo had gone over the report from the Soldat not too long before he left to deal with the Grimmjow incident, and had already ordered Sale to produce standard attire that would fit the themes of this world. Simple wear that they could use when scouting out the various towns and kingdoms that dotted this world. What he also needed was a map. Perhaps he would send out those two Soldat, since they have experience now. Once they acquire more of said experience, they would prove valuable in briefing the nature of the various towns and also provide good training instructors for when children eventually start to populate the area. Ichigo put a hand on his chin. He pondered his next words before acting. Aizen? He called out to the empty room. It didn't take long to get a response. Stepping out of the shadows was the man Ichigo had called out for. Glasses gleamed in the false sunlight filtering through the windows. Yes, Ichigo? That smile bothered Ichigo. Aizen was up to something and Ichigo needed to know what exactly that something was. However, this took precedence. You are aware that we will be running into a housing situation, are you not? Aizen nodded and adjusted his spectacles before responding to the inquiry. Indeed I am. I already have Seo and his subordinate working on constructing a vast city around the underground complex. It will be in rings. There will also be an above-ground settlement, but that will be solely for the farming and will consist of only that aspect of production and the housing necessary for the production we require. Ichigo gave a slight nod. So Aizen was a step ahead as always. He needed to find something to hold Aizen down. He's been scheming, might as well try asking. Aizen, have you been scheming behind my back? It sounded dumb, but what was Aizen going to do? Lie and prove Ichigo right or tell the truth? Yes, I am. However, if I say any more then that would be telling. The smirk was all Ichigo needed to see before he put that situation to rest. Whatever it wasn't negative to him yet. If that was the case then it wasn't something to be worried about. Regardless, even if it was a plan to go behind Ichigo's back, then what all could Aizen do to beat him, or restrain him? Nothing. There was nothing the man could do that could harm him, so Ichigo decided to relax, and just roll with the punches. See what life had in store for him. Leal sat in his study going over the reports from Grimmjow and his group before he passed them on to Ichigo. He had to correct much of their writing and adjust grammar, but overall it wasn't the most tedious task he had been asked to accomplish. What do you want, Jay? Quilge bowed as he entered the room. He had been surprised at being found out. Leal didn't even act surprised. He wasn't about to play any games that the other Sternritter wanted to play. He had greater plans to take care of as it was. I would be shocked, but the X-axis was His Majesty's bodyguard for a reason. Leal scoffed. Don't waste my time, Jay. State your business and leave. I have important work to do. Quilge frowned behind Leal's back before regaining his composure. Very well, I came to inform you that a little birdie flew into my cage and oh did it sing for me. It sang a song of conspiracy, and my worry is what if that song was sung to His Majesty? I doubt he would be so kind as to overlook heresy within his domain, don't you think, Leal? The former leader of the Schutzstaffel grit his teeth. The snake backed him into a corner. Maintaining his composure was key in this situation. He had to show that he wasn't going to accept being toyed with. He still held a position of power over the J. After a moment's hesitation, Leo resumed his paperwork, never once looking up to Quilge. What of it? I'm sure the lords are fully aware of all that is happening within this complex, and I am sure that if enemies were found within this glorious kingdom that the lords would have them dealt with accordingly. Leo could feel Quilge tense up in a moment of anger before he relaxed. I merely wish to inform you of the dealings within the Naktrike. Nothing more. With a curt bow, Quilge exited the room, leaving a puzzled Leo. How could Quilge have knowledge of the plan? Nobody spoke to him. He wasn't sensed nearby. Was he the shadow? Too many questions and not enough answers. Would you stop pacing? You're making me nervous. Stefan about-faced and sat down beside the equally anxious Bridget. They were currently sitting outside Lotato's office as they waited to report in. A soldat stepped out and ushered Bridget and Stefan into a small office that was Spartan in nature. Sitting in the middle of the room was a desk that held reports that almost hid the lithe form of their boss. Thank you for coming as quickly as you have. Sliding across manila folders to both, Lil Tato sighed as their eyes grew wide. Before they asked, she continued, You both will be sent up for early promotions, and we have another mission for you. We need scouts to assess the defenses of the person identified within these reports. Passing another folder across to the two soldat, Lil Tato dismissed them. Once outside the office, Stefan pumped his fist in excitement. They were finally getting noticed by the higher-ups. You hear what she said? Stefan had grabbed onto Bridget's arm like a child, and she had to fight the urge to punch him in the face. Somehow she managed to maintain her composure, and just shoved the overexcited soldat off of her. Yes, but did you forget she just said the promotion would be sent up? It hasn't been approved yet, you know? Stefan shook his head in response. I couldn't care less about the promotion, I'm giddy about the mission. We're going to investigate the powerful people. That means Lord Ichigo has faith in our abilities. Bridget couldn't help the small amount of red that creeped into her cheeks. Shaking her head, she brought her mind back to reason. Where he thinks we're expendable. We're low-ranking. I don't even understand why they had us come all the way up to Commander Lil Tato. We could have just as easily been tasked out by our sergeant, or even corporal. You worry too much, Bridge. Stefan waved off her concerns, and as Bridget thought over his words, he did make a few good points. Maybe it was best not to really think about it too hard. After all, they did successfully complete their last mission, and were some of the most experienced in this world at this point in time. Still think you're taking this too much in stride? We can't throw caution to the wind cause we got a few bonus points. Her friend barely acknowledged her counter, and she chose to drop it in exchange for prep. First things first, food. Lil leisurely made his way to Askin's room. Upon entering, he was met with a few familiar faces. Quilge and Berenice were waiting along with Askin. He carefully observed Quilge after recalling how peculiar he had acted during that encounter. Great, now that everyone is here, let's talk about our favorite Lord Aizen. Everyone's attention was drawn to Askin after he addressed the group. I'm sure we're all in agreement that he's messing with all of us. Indeed, either he or one of his minions visited me in my office, disguised as a J. Quilge barely let his shock show, but it was enough of a reaction for Leal to be sure that it wasn't him and that he was who he claimed to be. If that is true, then he could play the part of any one of us. How would we be able to tell if we were ourselves? Askin nodded at the question. Already got you, Quilge. We all have a code that we use around each other with special phrases that we'll use to identify each other. And if one of us does not know what the code is, then we know that they're either Aizen or another hidden spy, and we just don't talk around them. Watching each of the other Quincy with caution, Leo focused on Berenice, who had yet to speak during the entire session. What do you think, Q? Addressing her and calling her out, he could see that she wasn't comfortable. Maybe they had a spy already among them. Collecting herself, she let a grin settle on her face. Sounds devious, I'm in. However, I must ask, wouldn't the code fail? Askin frowned. Leo took her words and was slowly putting the puzzle together. If the Dayton is to still be trusted, then he could just slowly piece it together. He does still have his skills even if he's supposedly working with us. It wouldn't make sense for him to not keep tabs on us. Hell, what's to say he's not listening in on this very conversation right now? Nothing. I say we piece the code and have our own between each of us that's unique to each person so it's harder to piece together, and also come up with other tests for each other that are individualized and not standard. I'm surprised you put so much thought into this. Sure you aren't a spy, Bree? Eskin barely dodged the arrow that had hit the wall behind him. Berenice dissolved her bow and sat back down. I have to think about these things due to leading the Inquisitors. It's my job to think like Eisen, and if I can think of it, then so can he. There's nothing we can do to stop him from breaking our codes after time, so the best thing we can do is stall for time. As much as we need to be ready in advance. Leo was liking where she was thinking and the fact that she planned that far ahead. He was actually kinda proud of her. He'd recommend her for a position among the elite guard with that foresight, but she seemed to be perfect right where she was, almost as if it was foreseen. The thought hit Leo like a ton of bricks and he froze for a moment, long enough to know that he couldn't be mistaken and that it might just be true. If his theory was true, then maybe, just maybe. He smirked. So this was all a part of an elaborate plan. He could appreciate that. Even if he was the closest to godhood, he felt Berenice would figure it out in time and Eskin wouldn't be far behind. Once they realized, then it would be over, so he would play their game and allow Ichigo's plan to move forward. At this moment Ichigo had gained a lot of respect and surprisingly Eisen had done so as well. It was perfect. Grimmjow stepped into the training arena. It was a massive dome that put Las Noches' artificial ceiling to shame. The barren landscape provided the perfect area to fight and unleash massive amounts of Ryatsu. A figure standing at the far end greeted his arrival with a wave. At this distance Grimmjow could barely make out who it was. Dirt and stone were blasted away as the panther took off in Sonito. Closing the distance with haste, Grimmjow appeared before the individual that had summoned him, Eskin Lavar. The Quincy bowed low to his hollow acquaintance. We meet again, although I fear our meeting will have to be much more concise than before. I really do hate wasting people's time. Grimmjow grit his teeth. You're already wasting your time, get out with it. Eskin feigned hurt as he let a smile slip onto his features. Quite. Let me cut to the chase, my feline friend. I need your help. Grimmjow scoffed at the Quincy. What could you possibly need my help with? Not that I want anything to do with it. The panther crossed his arms as Eskin deflated. Alright, guess it was worth a shot. Turning his back to Grimmjow, Eskin sent a wave behind him. Guess we'll just go fight Eisen by ourselves. Without you. His attention now peaked. He appeared in front of Eskin. What did you say? Eskin sighed and spoke slowly. I'm going to fight Eisen. You said you weren't interested, so I guess we'll just have to leave you out. Pushing past Grimmjow, Eskin smirked as he felt a hand on his shoulder. You better not without us. The death dealing hid his smirk and faced the panther once more. Can you really speak for all of the rest? He could see the hesitation in the panther's eyes. We have our reasons for hating him, and I'm sure you have your own as well. We'll fight with you, if only this once. Eskin held out a hand. I'm sure we have more in common than you think. Grimmjow dismissed the Quincy's remark and took the offered hand. Ains strolled beside Albedo with thoughts of his recent encounter still fresh in his mind. Kurosaki was from Japan, just not his. That was a strange thought, but if he could come from his world to this one, then why not someone from another world? However, if there are individuals with the power of Kurosaki and his subordinates in this world, then he would have to be more cautious with his future endeavors. He would have to test their strength and see whether Kurosaki would be a threat or a possible ally. Lord? Turning, Ains looked down at a curious Albedo, shaking away his stray thoughts. What is it, Albedo? Checking to make sure nothing was wrong was the first item on the Overlord's list as he made sure to observe her posture carefully as they walked. When you spoke to the eavesdropper, you asked him if he was from Japan. What is this Japan that you spoke of and how do you know of it? Ains had to take a moment to think on the question. He had expected it after his momentary slip of the tongue, but he had not expected it so soon. Choosing to stop in the field, he turned to face Albedo, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. While he couldn't avoid noticing the quivering of her legs, he was more focused on the timid and almost fearful expression on her face. Yes, I did. Japan is where I'm from, another world. Ains hoped that the succubus would take the response and not dig deeper, as he wasn't sure what her reaction would be to him being a former human. As the overthinking-induced panic began to set in, Ains was surrounded by a green light. The thoughts vanished and his head was cleared. Strange. He had already made some assumptions on what the light was based on observations, however he didn't have much in the way of time since arriving to give it much more than basic thought. Maybe he should look into it more. However, the matter that had him concerned in the first place seemed to have resolved itself, as Albedo had opened a gate and was waiting patiently for him to enter. With a hasty apology, Ains entered the gate that led back to the Great Tomb. It was time to go home, time to formulate the next plan. He needed to look into Ichigo and his group as they were unknowns. He would need to explore this world and so much more. This was going to be a long night for him. At least he didn't need to sleep anymore. That was a blessing. For now, Ichigo stood behind a window overlooking the training area that was constructed for the soldat and the stern ritter. It was a work of art, and for the most part it was all Aizen's work. Not that Ichigo didn't have a say, but he did have to give credit where credit was due. The megalomaniac had a thing for art. How are things progressing? Aizen could be seen shifting in the background as he removed his feet from Ichigo's desk, readjusting his suit and dusting it as he stood up and maneuvered his way next to the strawberry. Exactly as we have planned it. They're meeting up in a couple of days to discuss their plan. Ichigo would hum at the news. He had seen this, however the future was still muddy and much of it revolved around the plans of his fellow powerhouse. Whatever the man was scheming, it was going to be the root of much chaos. A disturbance drew both ascended beings' attention, with Aizen marking their notice. How may we help you, Sail? The rhetorical question gave the hollow researcher pause. Fidgeting for a moment before regaining his composure, he bowed lowly to his two bosses. Project Genesis is complete, lords. This got both of their attention. Ichigo held his breath as he motioned for Sail to continue. All of the designated individuals have been cloned, however their memories were an issue. Aizen raised a hand to silence Sail. Already taken care of, so no need to bring it or any of the other complications up at this moment. Thank you for the report. Now get everything ready for the next phase of my plan. With a curt, low bow, Sail vanished with the static sonito. Next phase of your plan, huh? Ichigo leaned against the glass that separated him from the soldat. He threw a questioning gaze towards the overthinking megalomaniac. Now Ichigo, to quote you, that would be telling. Trust that this plan will work. Plus, if you really wanted to know, you'd just use the Almighty to see what I was planning. His grin was more than Ichigo needed to know that Aizen already knew he couldn't see what the madman had planned. Without humoring him with a response, Ichigo vanished, leaving Aizen standing alone in the chamber. As he turned around, three shadows moved along the ceiling, seemingly shifting through the window as if it wasn't really there, and the illusion around Aizen shattered to reveal a lab with several large tubes, 3 of which were empty. The most noticeable one that could be seen was a tube with a floating body in it. The individual inside had long, spiky, black hair that was pinned up with bells. A high-ceilinged room was where the meeting had been held. A meeting that would determine much of the future. The highest ranking of both the Quincy and the Hollows sat around the room, each taking their own side, but the tension in the air wasn't from the blood feud that the two races had between each other, but a common hatred for a certain individual. Taking the first step in bringing the meeting to order, a skin stood, addressing the room. We all know why we're here and who we're after, so let's get this meeting to order. Baz, flanked by Bambiette from the right and Grimjow from the left. Lil Tato and Giselle flanked Nelio while Tyr was sitting, cross-legged, with Meninis and Candace beside her. Berenice sat across from the main commanders with Quilge and Leo beside her. Askin was the only one standing as he continued to address them. I have tasked several soldat with keeping tabs on both Lord Ichigo and Aizen, and from what they have gathered, the Hollow, Sailaporo Grands, is aiding Aizen in some scheme. The main theory we have is that Aizen plans to overthrow Lord Ichigo. We just don't know when or how he plans on doing it. Scanning the room for reactions, he got much of what was expected. No gasps, no stupefied reactions. It was calm, quiet as those gathered processed the information. It was expected after all. With Aizen being who he was, he probably hated being under the thumb of Ichigo. It was only a matter of time till something popped off. So what are you thinking we should do? Tyr probed Askin as he took the question with pause. I say we confront the bastard before he can so much as make a move. The boisterous voice of Basby broke the silence that had formed around the question as he stood up, only for the questioning looks that fell on him to cause him to bashfully return to his seat. While that is good, what would Ichigo think if we all just attacked his right-hand man without just cause and just on the hunch that something bad would happen? Tyr responded to the brash response of the younger Quincy. I mean, what else can we do? I hate just sitting around and just waiting for something to happen. I need some action in my life, come on. While Grimjow beside him nodded in sympathy. As much as I am loath to say it, Tyr is right on this one. We can't simply rush in and allow him to turn us into the bad guys. We'll be falling right into the snake's hands. Giving Baz a sympathetic pat on his shoulder before sitting back down. So then what are we gonna do? Baz still wasn't satisfied. Why call the meeting if they weren't going to do anything about the situation? The smirk that creeped onto Askin's face had everyone staring at him. We're going to have a little chat with Senior Grands and make sure he tells us everything we need to know. His grin did not waver as he looked around the room, locking eyes with each member as they picked up what he was putting down. When we do, we will have all the evidence we need to make sure Eisen is taken care of for good. On another note, however, I also wanted to make sure we were all on the same page. All of us hate Eisen and appreciate what Lord Ichigo has done for us, and as far as I'm concerned, once Eisen is out of the way then we're still square. No fighting? Askin reached out his hands in an offering of peace between the age-old enemies. Shared looks were split between the Quincy and the Hollows alike as the tension rose between the two groups. It was snapped when Grimjow of all people stood up. As long as the bastard is taken care of, I don't give a what you lot do. As long as we're all supporting Kurosaki then you do what you have to. Just let's take Eisen down once and for all. For das Nachtreich. One by one the chant continued as more joined in before Askin settled down next to Tyr, who was the only other not interested in the chanting that had overtaken the group. A look passed between the two and Tyr expressed what was on both their minds. I just hope we're not too late. Askin's confidence seemed to melt away as he nodded in agreement. Ichigo was their best shot at a new life, and if this was all to work out, they needed him to unite them. Stefan and Bridget had arrived at the location specified in their mission statement. When they landed out of their Herenkyaku, they were expecting to see some kind of fortress, but what awaited them was nothing like they imagined. Before them stood a 200-meter-wide mausoleum with 4 smaller mausoleums situated at either corner of the walled exterior of the base. It appeared undefended, and that unnerved the two soldat more than the unconventional look of the location. If this is what the exterior presented, then the inside had to be heavily defended. They were not there to invade, however, and that thought was one of the only things keeping the two from fleeing. It did strike the two soldat as odd that the area had been clearly manipulated to make it appear more inconspicuous, and it almost seemed to blend in with the surrounding rolling hills. Someone is watching us. Stefan didn't need to look to know. They had been followed since they set foot within 300 meters of their target. It felt omnipresent, however. He could tell as well as Bridget that the individual watching them was far above and merely waiting for any hostile action. All right then, let's start taking notes. You know the drill we rehearsed. The two zipped off in different directions and performed a high-speed parameter check. It was the best the two could do at their power level to keep whoever was watching them on their toes. Meeting back at their starting local, the two compared their notes, and all seemed to be in order. Bridget caught sight of something within the walls that seemed to draw her attention. What is it? Bridget's breath hitched as her eyes went bloodshot and her body paled. Following her gaze, Stefan too saw what was bothering his companion. Standing in the doorway of the center mausoleum was a figure of small stature with a blood-red dress with 2 figures of normal stature standing behind her. The eyes, however, were what caused him pause like Bridget. Those swirling sanguine orbs radiated power unlike he had felt since Ichigo's debut. Power that was far beyond him and power that shook him to his core. He wasn't sure if it was fear or if it was instinct, but the second the smaller figure stepped forwards he grabbed Bridget by the collar and vanished in a bolt of speed. Shelter stepped out of the mausoleum and gave a half-hearted sigh. The chase would have been fun, but she was directly ordered by her Lord Ains to not pursue but merely dissuade any intrusion by those weaker than them, and well, maybe just a short chase wouldn't do much harm. Follow them, and bring me one. I'm curious how those of this world taste. With the order, the 2 vampires behind her vanished and gave chase. Oh, this would be fun indeed, and she was sure that her Ains would forgive her. Eisen was standing over a body that had been set on a gurney within Sale's lab. It was a shame that his plan had come to this, but the measures he had to take to ensure its completion were finally starting to come together. It was irritating that he had to work around the Quincy, Berenice, but she would get what was coming to her in time as long as everything went according to the plan he had set out. It would, of course. It was one of his plans after all, but that wasn't to say that he didn't have contingency plans in place to prevent a total loss if indeed his plans did fail. It was always good to be a little cautious when there were unknown variables involved. How far along is he? He sent a passing gaze to the hollow that had been working in the lab for weeks to make sure everything was going smoothly and according to plan. Vitals are stable for now, but are you sure you want to do this? Aizen merely gave a sly smile in return before his demeanor changed to bring more levity to the gloom situation before the two. Of course, I wouldn't be here to watch him die if I wasn't sure I wanted this to happen. To be honest, this is probably the only time I could get away with something like this. He was prepared for what was going to come his way once those serving under him found out what was going on, and everything was still going to plan. Soon Ichigo would get his wish, just not in the way he had foreseen it happening. Let's get this over with. I want to see him dead already. Sale sent one more glance to his maniacal lord before typing into a computer system that was hooked up to the several tubes and other monitoring equipment attached to the body on the table. As you wish, Lord. Sale hated being a part of this whole ordeal, but then again, when would he have the chance to study a specimen such as the one on the table unless he went through with the operation? As he flipped a switch, a small arm reached down from above the table and positioned itself parallel with the temple of the individual on the table. With another button press, a light was emitted from the pronged head of the arm and the body shook violently, with Aizen and Sale being necessary to hold the body still long enough for the beam to finish its work, and then all went silent. A small chuckle escaped from the madman before evolving into maniacal laughter as he threw his hands into the air with joy. Finally, after so many years, he was dead and Aizen was free. Sale stepped away from the cackling madman before rushing out of the room as Aizen stopped his laughing, the only remaining sound being that of the monitor that presented the heart rate of the patient. A dull, monotonous tone signaling a flat line. Finally, the last piece was done, and now he was ready for the final party to begin. With the individual on the bed no longer among the living, or was it dead? Whatever the technicality, the job was done, and it was time to move on to the next stage of the plan. Tenderly picking up the body after removing the monitoring equipment, Aizen vanished in Shunpa, leaving Sale, wherever he had slinked off to clean up the mess left behind. Ains had seen the two approach his tomb, but they dared not enter. He figured them less intelligent, but that was also why he was merely watching them from a distance. He had mere watched them on their approach, and Shalter was guarding the upper levels as usual, so he doubted that if they were this cautious that they would enter. However, it was always better to be safe than sorry. It was troubling that Kurosaki had already found their base location, and it made him nervous that they sent out reconnaissance so early after meeting, but that just gave him enough pause to take them seriously. Kurosaki was dangerous, and he sent lower-level personnel so that he might underestimate the bulk of his troops. Whoever this Kurosaki was, he was cunning, and Ains had to give him that much credit. It would be difficult to gain an upper hand now that his enemy knew his base's location, yet he failed to find his enemies. Something troubling you, Lord Ains? Seabass, ever the astute, commented on his lord's pause. Yes, Seabass, we need to gather more intel on Ichigo Kurosaki. The unknown that he is now does not bode well, especially since he already has us in his sights. What if next time he brings actual fighters? If that comes to pass, then the intruders will be dealt with in the same way all do. We will slay those beneath us in your name, Lord. As the last of the creators, we will do what we must to ensure the survival of our home. That was a comforting thought to Ains. Looking up at Seabass, the Lord of Nazarick tried his best to smile. Then do what you must to ensure the safety of Nazarick. I'll leave it to your capable hands, Seabass. With that, he stood up and made his exit, just in time to miss Shalter as she sent her servants after the two right after they vanished in some unknown movement technique. Seabass, however, saw this transpire and shook his head. This would not end well, better prepare for the worst. So brash, even for a floor guardian. A skin was leaning against the wall along with Grimjow as Basby and Berenice were questioning Sailaporo Grands. Where is the bastard and where is Lord Ichigo? Answer us, you sleazy. Sale was calm as ever, even with his back to the wall and a blade at his throat. I don't know how to say this in any simpler terms, you monkey. Ichigo is with Aizen and they are taking care of HUK. Baz forced the tip of his blade past the former Espada's hierro and into his throat. Leaning in, he eyed the poor scientist. Bullshit, you. We already looked this place up and down, and we haven't seen hide nor hair of either of our lords. Now you tell me just what is going on, or so help me, you'll die by my hands. Askin was getting a little tired of the games as Sale only smiled wider. Then so be it, but then you won't know Aizen's dirty little secret. This infuriated Baz to the point he was about to make the scientist eat his blade, but a hand on his shoulder caused him to pause. Please allow me. Berenice stepped between the two and locked eyes with Sale as hers turned a deep shade of crimson as her voice came out commanding the now tranced Sale. Where is Ichigo, and what is Aizen planning? Speak. The Pinkette merely grinned as if deep down he wanted them to know. Ichigo is gone and I did not lie, he is with Aizen. This seemed to shock Berenice out of her ability, as Seo grasped his throat tenderly. What do you mean gone? Askin was interested enough to get himself involved. The smile on the hollow's face said all it needed to for the pit that had formed in Askin's stomach to drop further down. It's XCTLEW had I meant assholes. Losing his composure, Seo continued. Ichigo is gone and now Aizen has him. Good luck on your little rebellion without him. With that statement, Baz shoved the coughing hollow into the wall, creasing the spiritual metal that formed it. The rage in his eyes and fire in his heart was clear. Enough. With that one word, Grimjow shook Baz out of his anger, and the buzzard dropped Sale to the ground, where he started giggling to himself insanely. He's not worth your energy. Plus, we'll need him in the future, for now we have to locate Aizen and Lord Ichigo. With that, everyone vanished, leaving just Askin with the downed hollow. Is what you say true? Sale's eyes gleamed as they locked with the elite guards. What would I have to gain from lying? That was all the answer Askin needed before vanishing in Herenkyaku. Grimjow and Askin had decided it best to leave Baz and Berenice behind in favor of just the two of them confronting the man. He was practically broadcasting his location to the whole Naktrike, but both knew what they were expecting to find and neither needed their subordinates to lash out against Aizen. Not yet, they still needed time, but for now they still needed to confirm their suspicions. Arriving outside the office of their lord and only common ground, Ichigo Kurosaki, Askin knocked on the door. After just barely reaching to touch the door, it had slowly creaked open as the two stepped into the chambers of their lord. What they found was unsurprising to either of the powerhouses. Aizen was sitting in Ichigo's chair with a Cheshire smile and his feet propped up on the mahogany desk. Pleasure to finally see someone has arrived. I figured lowering myself to your level would get some of you to show. Mark me as surprised that it was you two in particular working together though. Never could have seen that one coming at all. The sarcasm dripping from his voice was palpable as he drew on. It was almost torture for the two as they allowed him his moment to gloat. You know why we're here, Aizen. Where's Ichigo? Aizen put a thumb to his chin in mock consideration. Oh, I don't know. Have you checked his office? Oh, we're in his office? Oh, silly me. How about this, quid pro quo? Aizen gestured with his hands before opening them as he made his offer. Not buying it, Aizen. We're not leaving without Ichigo. Grimjow's instincts were screaming at him that something was off, but he couldn't put his finger on it yet, and that terrified the panther more than Ichigo did. Oh, you're no fun. Figured I'd give the whole mystery a try since it worked so well for Jin. Well, I guess I can't keep it a secret for long. How about you turn around and let me know if that's what you're looking for? Aizen gestured behind the two as something fell from the ceiling and slammed against the floor with a sickening squelch. Askin was the first to turn, with Grimjow following after before both of their eyes shoot as far open as they could go. You sick bastard! Both were mortified by what they saw, to the extent that they move in unison to draw their blades on Aizen. Resurrection, Volstandig. Thanks for watching this video. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support and follow the Ballad-Eternal for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. If you like to hear adult version of this and other stories, I'll give you link of my Patreon. See you in the next video. Goodbye.